Hi, HRN listeners. We're celebrating our 15th anniversary, and we have a really fun campaign and an ask for you. This 15th anniversary tour is aiming to bring you closer to unique food and music experiences in some of the most exciting cities in America. All the while, we're raising funds to support our work empowering the next generation of food systems storytellers through our fellowship programs. Here's how it works. Donate to HRN and be entered into a raffle in the city of your choice to win a dinner for two at a noteworthy restaurant and tickets for two to a concert at a prominent local venue. We have incredible partners in New York, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, Nashville, Las Vegas, Charleston, Asheville, and Ardmore, Pennsylvania, who have donated a meal for two and two tickets to a concert of the winner's choice. And all donations help fund our fellowship programs, where we're helping to build essential workforce readiness skills and food system storytelling skills. Check out heritageradionetwork.org/15 to donate and enter to win today. That's heritageradionetwork.org/15. Thank you.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network. HRN podcasts have something for every food lover. Learn more at heritageradionetwork.org.
This episode is brought to you by Roberta's, home of Heritage Radio Network since 2009. Learn more about Roberta's at robertaspizza.com.
Welcome to another episode of Culture and Flavor with Zella Palmer. Y'all, I'm so excited today to have my dear friend Prince on this episode. He is one of the youngest award-winning small business owners, chefs, and winemakers in New Orleans. Lobo serves as the general manager of Adis Nola, a highly rated and recognized Ethiopian restaurant founded by his mother and his father. He is the creator of their specialty honey wine. While Prince wears many hats in his family business, he currently serves as one of 12 hospitality entrepreneurs chosen throughout the country for the James Beard Legacy Network program. Prince, welcome to Culture and Flavor.
I'm glad to be here, Zella. Thank you so much for bringing me to be a part of this amazing podcast. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so excited. So let me just say that I just love your family. You all have been such a light in New Orleans in the restaurant industry. And, you know, we remember you when you all had a small restaurant, your first restaurant on Broad Street, and just your fun and engaging Instagram posts where you would come outside and you would say out to the world, "Welcome to Adis Nola." And we would just laugh and just, you brought so much joy to the community. And I just want to give you and your family your flowers.
Oh, we receive them, so much. Our family, every single one of us really pours our heart into the work that we do every single day at the restaurant. So it really means a lot, specifically coming from you, one of the most impactful, one of the most trailblazing, really amazing people in the city. And your support is really, deeply, deeply appreciated.
I think you need like a whole motivational recordings because you motivate people with your words. And people need to play it early in the morning just to get their day started. So thank you for that kind compliment. I appreciate that. But I want to start with your journey. You were born in Baton Rouge, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Oh, in fact, close, almost. I was raised in Baton Rouge. I spent the majority of my childhood and my adolescent years in Baton Rouge, but in fact, born in Luanda, Angola, historically one of the most expensive places to live in the entire world. In Angola, Luanda. So that's where the story starts, at least for me.
Well, tell us about the story. I want to hear from the beginning. I know our listeners want to hear your story and just how you ended up in New Orleans on Bayou Road.
Right. Out of everything, I think, and I talk about this a lot, some of the most beautiful moments in life really happen by coincidence. And not even by coincidence, really, it's God's favor and divine vision for you. Every single person has this. If you really look into your own life, you will really find and see how favor of God, the universe, our ancestors really have moved you I definitely think you could definitely see it. It's very clear in what you're doing with your book coming out, Zella, and I think it's very evident with Adis Nola. It really starts all the way back, right? We're talking about communism in the continent of Africa. With my father being born in Angola in 63 at the time, his father working with the Portuguese who hadn't left and won't leave until 1975. Um, they were sending all of their students to go to school in Europe. He ended up being sent at the brisk age of 14 to Czechoslovakia at the time in Prague, where he meets friends and where he'll eventually go on to meet my mother the next year. My father's name Jaime de Lobo, my mother's name Brooke Alamayehu. They meet each other. My mother gets sent because her father was in the military. He was, in fact, the royal guard of Haile Selassie, and he was the youngest royal guard. He actually died in service protecting the monarchy, which we know was also overthrown in 74 as well, too. So they meet, create this unbreaking divine union, and decide to come to Angola after they graduate high school in this, small town. They go to Angola. I was born, 97, very recently for many people. That's where the story starts, right? My mother, an Ethiopian woman, married to an Angolan man, and my father, which isn't very typical. Ethiopians, if you know them, they're very prideful people. They don't like to mix. You know what I mean? They don't like to mix much at all. But, my father just has that charm, I guess. So it starts.
He does.
I try to pick up some from him as much as I can, but 97. So I was born in Luanda. At the time, my mother was working for a nonprofit. My father was a vet. So both of them actually had ended up, not yet, but both of them eventually will become PhD doctors whenever they decide, when I was 2 years old, to move to America. My mother came by herself because I kept getting sick. I almost died as a baby, in fact, because I was very susceptible to malaria and the mosquitoes. They say I got that sweet blood, is what they say. I got that good stuff. You know what I mean? High quality. You know what I mean? High quality. I give credit to my father for eating a lot of chocolate when he was young. I think that's what that is.
Maybe it's the honey wine.
It's something. It's something. I don't know what it is, but boy, even to this day, they love me so much. So actually, at 2 years old, I almost died, and so my mother was very frantic and just concerned. I'm her only child, and so she can't lose her only child. So by any means necessary, she has to find a way to keep me safe. Her decision was to come to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, out of all places. You ask why, I'm like, out of all places, the world is a pretty big place. People, you can pretty much go anywhere in the world almost anywhere in the world as an immigrant that you could decide to go. But the important thing for many people is that they like migrants. From a migrant perspective, generally speaking, they'll go where there's family, friends, a community where they can really be comfortable. In Baton Rouge, there was one gentleman and his daughters who were there. His name is Ashagre Yegletu. This gentleman was the second in command over Ethiopia from 1960 to. Let me backtrack. This in fact would be after the monarchy was overthrown. So after 74, it was taken over by a lot of students. In fact, college students who had revolted because there was a drought that was happening in Ethiopia, and they wanted to reclaim try to protect the general populace. Whenever the monarchy, Haile Selassie, 82 at the time, had become deeply out of touch with humanity. So they took over the country, and was this little boy, Ashagre Yegletu, who developed his entire high school curriculum. And they had found him, discovered him, and wanted to give him many opportunities for growth, which in turn turned into being the executive prime minister of Ethiopia for about 4 years, until he had to hide as a refuge where he found where no Ethiopians, no community whatsoever. He came to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. where he can kind of hide in exile after the devastating acts that come from Mengistu and his regime, killing almost every single general in leading Ethiopia at the time, and about 1 million Ethiopians. And so he fled and eventually became a professor of business at Baton Rouge at Southern University in Baton Rouge, and still is to this day. My mother found him and his daughters. They became best friends, and then that's where her journey starts. Yeah.
Wow.
Long-winded,
Story.
but you can tell there's a book coming out soon. We
Oh,
haven't,
yeah,
we haven't put pen to paper, but I'm glad I can kind of solidify it on this podcast. I haven't had a chance to write much of that yet, but I'm collecting as much data as I can to talk about that crazy, crazy, crazy journey.
What a story. What a story. And so you coming to Baton Rouge, you growing up without that many Ethiopian or Angolan,
Anything.
patriots, anything, right? Tell us about your life just growing up in Baton Rouge. I mean, did you meet Lil Boosie?
Oh man! In fact, in Baton Rouge, I would say was a lot of those years really had a large impact and still have a large impact on me right now. It made me fight. It turned me into a fighter. If you know people from Louisiana, specifically New Orleans, Baton Rouge in general, we're fighters. We go through a lot of adversity. There are a lot of trials. There are a lot of tribulations because this is statistically the 50th state in Louisiana, even though, again, New Orleans is its own thing and Baton Rouge is kind of its own thing in comparison to the rest of Louisiana. I had to fight for my identity. I think one of the biggest struggles I had to really discover was, who in the hell am I? Who is this kid whose father's from Angola, mother's from Ethiopia, parents were raised in Europe, being raised in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, out of all places? Who in the hell is this kid? And so that's a battle that I had to fight for at least 2 decades, from being there since I was 2, and still kind of adding to that who I really am as an individual. And in that, in growing up in the hood, South Harrell's Ferry, Orleans Lane, we're not even going to say the hood. I'm talking about we were in the gutter. This was no one should live here. I think there's even caution tape in this neighborhood where I was raised. Now, after the flood that happened in Baton Rouge, they just decided, in fact, this is a better place that we'll just keep barred off so people don't end up going back there. I remember seeing, AK-47s in this neighborhood where there's so many children just running around without their parents. The Candy Lady, joyous memories of the Candy Lady and the ice cream trucks coming around. And also terrifying memories of fighting, right? Of just being out amongst all this youth and children, troubled youth, who really never really had any guidance from their elders. And so in the midst of all of that, being called the white boy, because I spoke so proper in my English that I was speaking was didn't have any accents or any accentuations to it. It was just blank English. So in those communities, I really, or in that community where my mother could afford to stay, right, as a college student, there was a lot of trouble. And also the school. I went to a private school. She saved up all of her money that my father would try to send her to barely afford to send me to a decent private school where I would go to be the only Black student in this school, along with my 4 other cousins in a school of about 600 students. We were the only Black people in this entire school. So we'd go there to be really experience firsthand racism from families, parents saying that their kids couldn't be around us, couldn't play with us. Or me always having been kind of the black sheep, literally in my classrooms, where I was always used as an example for discipline. Largely, I think, simply because of my skin tone and just being Black. So there was a lot of conflict growing up, but inevitably those challenges, I believe, really developed and cultivated me into becoming a tried, tested, and true individual who can really stand up against anything, who knows himself better than anything else.
So how did your mother keep you grounded in
Mm.
spite of all of the, the challenges that you face in a private white, school, elementary school, dealing with all kinds of misery and poverty in the neighborhood that you grew up in Baton Rouge. How did she keep you grounded? Was she able even to, get access to Ethiopian food to make sure that you knew your culture? How did she keep you grounded?
Well, I really give a lot of, credit and just praise to her for going to school as a college student, working a job, that pretty much was like throughout the sleeping nights that she would leave while I was sleeping, and then still finding time to raise, me as a child. It wasn't easy in any way, shape, or form. But also credit to the sisters that she had developed, that community that she had developed through Ashe, right? The gentleman who was responsible for also getting her into Southern University. They built a community, right? So if my mother, generally speaking, was always busy, if she wasn't able to get me from school or she wasn't able to look after me one day, I would be with Auntie or Tia Ana or Tia Saba, and we would be. And Tia comes from the background of like the Angolan or Portuguese background, which is where that comes from. I would be with either one of them, and then each one of them had two children, so we had like five of us who also went to that school where we really stuck together. We really fought for one another whenever it came when it came down to it, and that community having that literal village that was able to raise me and the rest of us, I think was really the network that created that connective tissue that allowed us all to really stay grounded, to really know who we were. We had something called mahabars. In Ethiopian culture, mahabar, it literally means coming together. And in this mahabar, once a month, Ashe ended up developing an Ethiopians in Louisiana organization, just a small group of like six or four or five families who would come together in celebrating of Ethiopian culture in someone's home every single month. And it was Doro Wat, the national dish with the injera, and then all these
Mhm.
other different flavors that we had a chance to experience since young. The coffee ceremonies as a way to wrap up the engagement that I used to hate as a child, and now also I think the main person promoting them, definitely in Louisiana, probably in the South as well. Promoting the origin of coffee. And so we get to see and experience and get exposed to all of these cornerstone pieces of Ethiopian culture, the clothes that they would wear, the handmade fabric, white, clean, with also intricate designs that were very unique to Ethiopian culture and also inspired the daishikis that we know and love today. From which is the origin. The origin comes from the 13th century noblewoman of Ethiopia, where a man had found this clothing design and decided to turn it into a dashiki. Um, so many different pieces, and this is where we get to see these cornerstone pieces of culture. And again, just beyond grateful. And that is what kind of built or was planting the seeds, we'll say, of really understanding, deeply understanding, and gaining that my own sense of pride from my mother's culture.
Mm. So, at what point did you all come to New Orleans?
Well, that was after my mother had went through the. Okay, so this is the crazy thing, right? So whenever you come as a migrant, right, or an immigrant, should I say,
Mhm.
um, especially at that time in history, things become very, very difficult. She did not choose the absolute best time to come to America. Why? It's about a year before, it was January 1st, 2000, whenever we come. And this is, in fact, a year before 9/11 happens. Why is that
Mm.
important? Why does that, have a big influence in our story? Well, because whenever you come to the States before then, getting citizenship, getting a green card is how that process, well, a visa first to come to America and then a green card. That process is generally easy. People before that, it doesn't take them many times, a year, 2 years to get into that process. After 9/11 happens, they immediately close and shut down. Like so many people from getting or bar off so many people from getting green cards in America because, this is coming from the Middle East, whoever, in 9/11, Ethiopia, including Egypt, is one of those countries that it's a Semitic. They speak a Semitic language. They are a Semitic people coming from East Africa, so they include them in this overall kind of lockdown or locking out people from this part of the world who are trying to gain citizenship. That what will happen from 9/11 will inevitably make it 20 years, 2 decades of being in America with just a visa, without being able to receive a green card.
Wow.
Okay, which we just got, mind you, a couple years ago.
Wow.
A couple years ago, right? Because of what happened during 9/11, Ethiopia gets brought into that situation. And so my mother, having no other choice, she has to go to school, and that's her only way to get a visa to be in America legally, unless you have a job, which before, again, 9/11 was easy. After 9/11, they make it to where you have to pay, or your employer has to pay $50,000 for you, or $30,000, I think. And you have to possess a job that no other person in your area is qualified to work. Okay. What does that mean? It's damn near impossible to have a real job in America and get a visa for it. So with no other options, my mother is pretty much left to go to school as a student and to stay in school as a student until there's no other options left. Literally meaning she was pretty much forced to become a PhD doctor or to get her doctorate, because there was literally no other way for her to remain in America legally unless she remained in school as a student. And then from that moment to have a job after she goes as far as you can in education, to have a job that's only designed for her. So she had to create, or essentially she had to create an entire curriculum within the school, who then had to put out a job application for her to be the only candidate that could successfully qualify for this position. And so that, is what ends up being the moment where we come to New Orleans. She graduates in 2009, 9 years later, after finally, getting her PhD, where she went through a lot of hardship to receive, and then having that position filled in Southern University of New Orleans. She comes down to New Orleans and becomes a professor of public policy in their business school as well. So that is how we ended up in New Orleans in 2009.
And when did your father come here?
He wouldn't come about 15 years later. Again, the struggle of being in America, he literally couldn't be here for longer than, I think, 3 months at a time or so. So he would come for a moment and then inevitably have to go back to Angola until he decided to also go back to school and get a student visa to also go back to school at LSU, and then go through his PhD program as well.
That must have been hard for you, growing up and not having your father there 24/7.
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. It was one of that by itself, I think, just in general in America and New Orleans specifically, is one of the leading contributing factors to the school to prison pipeline, right? We talk about 1 in 4 Black men will either go to prison, which is an unbelievable statistic. And a lot of that was successfully designed by, in the 80s, during so many different programs that they were doing to divide the Black household, even other propaganda that they were putting into our communities, the war on drugs, alcoholism in our communities. It really divided our household. So it's a well-known fact that not having a father figure specifically in a Black family household substantially negatively contributes to a lot of the issues that we see in New Orleans, right? We're talking about crime increases. We're talking about, the lack of youth programs, the lack of leadership and guidance from these young men. And, I as well was a victim of that, from simply my father was alive, but he simply just wasn't there. And so essentially what I had to do on my own from my adolescence was teach myself how to become a man, which is something I'm still doing at 25 years old, still having to learn, still having to teach all myself all the skills, all the characteristics, and what it really looks like. Because if you don't see something growing up, then it becomes substantially more difficult to be able to be something, right? So if you don't see a man being a father in your household, you have to, what I was able to do on my own, or had to do on my own, was to create that image of what I thought a man was for his woman, right? So how do I become a good partner? How do I show up for my children? How do I really be the best man and to lead this legacy, right? And so a lot of it, I thought that because my father wasn't there, a lot of it I thought was just working hard and not actually providing emotional support to my partner, to potential children. So yeah, it's difficult to say, but that's a whole nother episode.
That's a whole nother podcast.
Right. to really dig into that, especially myself. Like I said, I was a victim of that as well, and it's something that I really think I want to change. And we talk about the negative outcomes of crime and all these things, and really the root cause of it is just we need more men to really step up, even if it's not direct fathers, biological fathers, just men in general, to really step up and to lead our communities into the right place. I think the women in New Orleans have been doing substantial, really groundbreaking work. But I think we need to see more Black men really step up and,
So true.
Yeah.
So true. So what were your impressions of New Orleans when you moved here? Because you were here pre-Katrina, correct?
Well, I've been back and forth pre-Katrina, being so close in Baton Rouge, my mother going back and forth. But we didn't eventually move until 2009 officially. But there is a story at a young prince, 8 years old. The year I can't necessarily remember, but we had came to New Orleans. I'm assuming pre-Katrina. We came to New Orleans, and I'm with my mother, her friends, and our other family members. And we come to New Orleans. I'm driving. We're riding down Claiborne. I look to the right. It's Manchou's Chicken. It's purple building. I look to the left. It's like Basin and all these people. Pretty much, I think, starting or ending a second line. All these graffiti under this, bridge. And I say to my mother, "Mother, please, can we go back to America?" Please.
And for our listeners, Louisiana is very diverse. Baton Rouge has its own culture. New Orleans has its own culture. And within Louisiana, you have Lake Charles, Opelousas, Lafayette. We have a very diverse culture. So, asking Prince about what his impressions were in New Orleans, I think, helped him and his family birth Adis Nola. And that's where we're going to take a pause, and we will be back after these advertisements. And we're going to talk about Haile Selassie and when he came to New Orleans, Emperor Haile Selassie, when he came to New Orleans. We're going to talk about the birth of Adis Nola. And then we're also going to talk about Prince and his return to Ethiopia for the first time. So we'll be back right after these messages. Thank you for listening to Culture and Flavor.
This episode is brought to you by Roberta's, home of Heritage Radio Network. Roberta's was founded in Bushwick in 2008 and has become one of the most iconic restaurants in the country. HRN made its home inside of Roberta's in 2009, and together they have become part of the DIY fabric of the neighborhood. Roberta's is open for lunch and dinner 7 days a week and serves much more than just the famous wood-fired pizzas. Their team dreams up new salads, pastas, and sandwiches on the regular. Roberta's Tiki Bar is alive and well in the back garden, serving up frozen drinks in the summer and hot toddies in the winter. Stop by the bakery and takeout spot next door for fresh breads, sticky buns, and pizzas to go. But Roberta's also extends beyond Bushwick, with multiple locations in New York City, Long Island, and Los Angeles. You can also find their frozen pies in grocery stores around the country. The spirit of Roberta's, like Heritage Radio Network, is everywhere. Here's to many more years of pizza-powered radio. Learn more about Roberta's at robertaspizza.com.
Okay, we're back. So, I'm curious to know, I don't know if a lot of our listeners know. And you talked about, your father, your own family. I'm sorry, not your father, your own family's legacy and participation in the Ethiopian Emperor Haile Selassie's, royal court. I would love to hear the story of how Haile Selassie came to New Orleans, and just your own impressions of the link and the connection between New Orleans and Ethiopia.
Well, the connections, I really feel like they are they're so closely tied to one another. Reading about Ethiopia, understanding about their history, and then seeing New Orleans for the first time, even as a child, I think it really sparks emotions that it's really hard to for these places to be so far apart yet so deeply connected. We're talking about the pride, we're talking about the culture of food, the culture of family, the culture of community, and all these things that come together between both of these places that are literally almost identical. On two completely different parts of the world, right? In Ethiopia, they have Meskel and Epiphany, all these special holidays. They're very spiritual, very religious people, being Orthodox Christian, where they'll do these second line dances using umbrellas that we'll also see in our second lines, specifically for weddings and whatnot around New Orleans. Is one thing for me that's really deeply connected, along with the food in itself. In Ethiopia, we're talking about a 2,000-year-old, longer than that, Black history, untouched Black history, uncolonized Black history. And when I see New Orleans, I feel that same fire of the people who are here. We're talking about the northernmost Caribbean city, a place where people can truly express themselves with no judgment, who can really be themselves, and who really have ownership over the cultural and spiritual involvement and influence in this city in the same way that they do in Ethiopia. Even though New Orleans being one of the oldest cities, if not the oldest city, if we're considering it, which you have to consider the indigenous population. Just seeing how much love that these people have, that our people have in New Orleans, and seeing that in Ethiopia, it's no surprise that a place like Addis Nola exists. But we're happy, and I think a part of my purpose is literally being the bridge between both of these people, right? Between both of these communities, for them to see one another, recognize one another, and then learn from one another, inevitably, to really find ways for our Black people uncolonized in Ethiopia and in New Orleans fighting against oppression, more than I think anyone, in more than many people in America. To just see that bridge, create that bridge, and inevitably fight forward towards a better future together.
So, just so our listeners can hear, just a little bit of context and why Addis Nola is so important. In 1954, when I wrote the book Recipes and Remembrances of Fair Dillard, 1869 to 2019, and shout out to Malik Bartholomew, who is a historian in New Orleans, a mutual friend of mine and Prince. And, he led me on this journey in the library and the archives to show me a cookbook that was from the 1950s that was in Dillard's archives. And, it talked about when Emperor Haile Selassie came to New Orleans, and he came in the 1950s. And there's an interesting, and before Miss Leo Chase died, the queen of Creole cuisine, I was able to get an interview with her, and she talked about how she was on Canal Street, and she dressed all of her children up because the emperor, the descendant of of Jesus Christ, of Sheba, of King Solomon, who was revered in Jamaican culture, was coming to New Orleans, and she wanted to, have her children see who he was. And she said that she remembered that none of her people knew who he was. And she said it made her sad, and that is one of the reasons why she decided that her children would go to HBCU, because she wanted she wanted her children to know their history. And, when Haile Selassie came, he was, they had to take down the segregated signs. They had to have an integrated ball for him because he was an international dignitary, and helped, make sure that Mussolini didn't take over Africa. Right. And so, with all of that knowledge, and with, an understanding of who you are now, and just being located in the historical Bayou Road, which I would love for you to let our listeners know why Bayou Road is so integral to our story, our global story. How does that make you feel?
I tap into that. That's a force and an energy that, again, whenever you wake up in the morning, whenever you walk out of the door, it just makes you, whoo, you got to feel that in your blood. It's a part of us. It's a part of every single one of us, not just me. It's a part of you. It's a part of every single Black man, woman, and child in New Orleans. That and just feeling that, whenever you wake up in the morning, we are kings, we are queens everywhere that we are on earth, and in so many ways. And I think just that mentality, feeling that in your heart, breathing that whenever you take a breath, feeling just the cells in your body made up of the things from the Ethiopia, the origin of the world. You have to feel that. You have to know that in so many ways. And that's just what that's when you talk about Haile Selassie, when we talk about these things, I get like teary eyed, and I get chills just knowing that history. And I want every single person, because I do understand so many perspectives, I want every single one of our people to feel that same energy, to walk with that same regalness, to walk with that same love in their heart, really to understand, like, yes, like we are, King Solomon, Queen of Sheba. That is our lineage, every single one of us. And for him to come into New Orleans is unbelievable. I'm looking for the spear right now. Apparently, he gave us some gifts.
Yeah,
To
yeah,
New
he
Orleans.
did.
So,
He gave a shield. He gave a shield. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's in Suno's archives, but don't quote me on that. But he did give a shield to the city. He was also hosted at Loyola University. They had a ball where the city of New Orleans gave him a Cafe Brûlot set, which is one of the, iconic coffee dishes in New Orleans that I would love to see make a comeback, where they take orange and lime and stick cloves in it and pour brandy over it. And it's one of the classic Creole coffee dishes. And then I think they gave him something else, but he was quoted as saying that he was excited to he was excited to hear jazz, try the shrimp and the fried chicken.
Like, come on now, that's exactly, that's us. I mean, that's our people, man.
Oh man. And
But
just
yeah,
imagine how it felt in the 1950s for African Americans to see him being treated with dignity and respect.
wow.
As that was deep. That was a deep moment in our history, and I just want to lift that story up. But how did Adis Nola come about? I mean, I would love to hear the story of how you all decided, you know what, we're going to open up an Ethiopian restaurant in New Orleans, because in other major cities, DC, New York, where there's larger Ethiopian communities, it's saturated, and it's a competition, and and people are now, Americans are used to eating Ethiopian cuisine in most major cities. So How did your idea, or how did your family's idea come about?
Well, I think we laid the groundwork beautifully to get into this part of the story. We talked about the connection of Haile Selassie coming to New Orleans. We talked about the connections between Ethiopia itself, right? And we talk about the name of the capital of Ethiopia, Addis Ababa. Wow.
Mm,
You have to feel that. Why? Because it translates to new flower. Addis meaning
mhm,
new, Ababa meaning flower. And we're talking about the connection between that and our New Orleans, right? A place 60% Black, full of our people, full of the culture, full of the love, in the same way connected in many ways to Ethiopia in itself, right?
mhm,
So talking about all these things, knowing this, feeling this, walking this, breathing this in every single cell of your body, putting yourself in my mother's position, being here for 2 decades and never really seeing a place or establishment where they highlighted or celebrated the connections between those cultures, or celebration of the people in both of those cultures and the communities in both of those cultures. She had a dream one day and woke up jumping out of her sleep to say, if I don't do this, I it's hard for me to believe that anyone else will. If
mm,
I don't do this, if I don't make this dream, vision, a reality in the way that people can experience it, I feel like no one else is going to do this,
mm.
because it just hasn't been done in the way that we know it, in the way that we believe it should be done.
Right.
Not because in many places around America, Ethiopian establishments, again, are the heart and spirit of our communities, along with the churches. But in those places, I feel like what tends to happen a lot of times is they become disconnected with the actual city, or the actual community where they occupy. Our people, again, being so prideful, in the same way as if a New Orleanian would go to DC and open a New Orleans restaurant, right? You're gonna go to Denver and you're gonna open a Cajun Creole restaurant. You're gonna feel, or if it doesn't exist, you're gonna want someone to do it, right?
Yeah.
It's the same thing whenever our Ethiopian people come to America. They generally create these communities that resemble back home. And so whenever we came, we wanted to highlight Ethiopia while also paying deep respect to New Orleans, knowing how developed, knowing how influential the culture has played in this specific city over any other city in America. We knew that we had to be that bridge between the continent, between the motherland and our current home, being that New Orleans is one of the main ports that a lot of our people, specifically from West Africa, 25% from Angola, Congo, where I was born, we're here in New Orleans to bridge that gap of bringing our piece of home, our slice of home, that slice of happiness and love, to New
Mm,
Orleans, right?
mm.
And so that was it. Knowing that there was no way around it, and so much so you can call it destiny, that it was destined to happen. That all the trials and tribulations of meeting my father and going to school, all of those things, 20 years in America without being a citizen, all of those things were so impactful for this establishment, for this place to be open and serving what I believe is some of the best Ethiopian food in the South, eventually America, to really
Dylan!
Adis no la. If you know, you know. If you don't, I'm glad that you heard it for the first time. That is our testament. All the things that we're talking about now is compiled in two words. Adis no la. That bridge, it lives, it breathes, it vibrates through that singular word, Addis Ababa and New Orleans, Louisiana, in one
Mm.
place, existing in one time, for our people, for our community, the bridge of the gap from one of the most historic cities in America back to the origin of humanity in Ethiopia.
So when you open a business, some of the things that they always say is so integral to opening a business: location, location, location. You are on Bayou Road. Adisnola is located on Bayou Road. Why is that location so integral to Black ownership, to your restaurant and your legacy and what you're building in New Orleans. Why is Bayou Road so special?
Wow. I mean, when we say Addis Nola, when we say it, right, understanding Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia, being the new flower, when you say Addis Nola, we're literally saying New Orleans. New in the sense of paying respect and homage to the ancestors, to the people who came before us. And if you're familiar with Bayou Road, and if you're learning about Bayou Road, one of the most important things to know is this is the oldest road in the city before it was even a city. While New Orleans was called Bobanca or Bobancha, right? Meaning the land of many tongues, the place of trade, the place of commerce for the indigenous, for the Choctaw, for so many people who had passed through this region. This was the land of our indigenous people, right?
Mm.
And even so much so that there's dates and information. I know that you can testify to this, that the Senegambian West African people had traveled to this land on their own before settlers, before colonizers had ever been here before, in trading with the indigenous people. This is ground zero. This is the crossroad of community, culture, blackness, freedom. This is where it begins. In many things in life, we know the world is circle. Where things begin are also where things end, right?
Mm.
So if we're starting at the ground zero, we know this will end as ground zero. This will always and forever be the place, the crossroad of culture, community, our people, Black freedom. This
Mm.
will always be that. And for us
Mm.
to come here and to put, our flag into the ground, to put our Addis Nola feet in love and family here specifically, is to push that as far as it can possibly go.
Tell us about some of the other businesses, some of your the other business owners that are on Bayou Road that has really created a unique community and just a place for not only locals to come, but people from all over the world, because you all are attracting, a lot of folks coming to Addis Nola that are hosting parties that are, you've created this community, but it's also in alignment with the other businesses that are on Bayou Road.
Well, on Bayou Road specifically, this road is in fact the a testament to the love in New Orleans, a testament to the love of family ties, and community of the McKennas. A part of that, at least recently, within the last 3 or 4 decades, Bayou Road is this labor of love that's come together so beautifully, in the sense that more than 50% of the street is Black owned, specifically Beverly McKenna and Mark McKenna. Beverly McKenna, who also had a similar dream with my mother, which is what connected them to those kindred spirits together, to bring the restaurant here. A dream of a fully Black owned street in New Orleans, not just her specifically, but for all of our people to come and see that there's Black ownership, entrepreneurship on this street we call the Black Bayou, right? And there's 13 businesses that are here. About 10 of them are Black owned businesses within a 1.5 block radius, right? So we're talking about McCarty's, some of the best fried chicken in New Orleans. Jesus, we order from them, I think, once a day. It's a part of our daily bread. Is McCarty's, right? Then you have a community book center that's been doing their thing for 2 decades here on Bayou Road. I think the longest standing Black owned bookstore in New Orleans. If Mama Vera, Mama Jennifer, their story is amazing. What they're doing in the city, they are literally, uh, books will be written about these women, and that are already written about these women, of
Mm.
what they've done in New Orleans,
Yes, indeed.
and they are so impactful and so pivotal for us being here as well too, being one of the people who encouraged Miss McKenna to go discover us as a restaurant in our original location. Then you have the ACC that just moved here, the Andrew Caillou Center that has No Dream Deferred, who's doing a Black Dream Festival in on our block right now,
Mm.
with black theater, black artists, all black produced theater sets that are happening across the street from the restaurant next to the community book center. Then you have Whiskey and Sticks, this really cool, really beautiful, and charming black cigar bar and whiskey bar. You have Manny from Fruit Orleans, who just moved to the block, who's been selling fruit from a pop up stand for the last 7 years, and started on this street. He had a
Mm.
full circle moment to come and have a brick and mortar, his first brick and mortar, and made a year anniversary recently on Bayou Road. Then you have
Mm.
Pagoda, which just recently turned into a co-op. So a worker-owned operation where I think more than half of their staff is also black, meaning that also is a percentage black-owned establishment that's owned by the people that work there. You have the Cupcake Fairies, I Am That I Am, the Rasta Temple, right? Who was here before we were? Keys of Beauty. I mean, last. I mean, it's endless, right? The amount
Yeah,
of
it's endless.
uh,
Cocoa Hut.
Cocoa Hut. Come on now, you know what I mean. I had to get some help. Cocoa Hut, who's here. Club Caribbean, who's been here
Oh man.
doing
Yeah.
their thing for the last 2 decades. Um, so we talk about all of these families, and really, what it is, the successful thing about Bayou Road is it's families. It's
Mm-hmm.
people who, even if they're not family, a co-op is designed in a way to represent a family structure, right?
Mm.
It's a husband and wife in Whiskey and Sticks Cocoa Hut, with the mother and one of her nieces working together, and so that's really one of the things that we're most grateful for in moving here, making that intentional decision to come and really be one of the pillars in this community to continue
Mm-hmm.
to highlight and represent Ethiopian culture, New Orleans history, not from Bayou Road to New Orleans, but also from Bayou Road to the world. We
Mm.
want people to know what's happening over here, and we're happy to be a part of it.
So what can you expect when I mean, I know it was so much intention in designing your new location on Bayou Road. How long have you all been open? Has it been a year yet? Has it been that long?
We made 6 months from November
Wow.
10th. Yeah, we just made 6 months, so half a year.
Because you all were building and reconstructing the
Well, yeah,
site
yeah.
for over COVID, and so you were so intentional about the design and how you wanted it to feel. Tell us what a patron can expect when they walk through the doors.
Well, first and foremost, we have to give credit where credit is due. Boa, one name, right? Like Cher, Boa herself, working with us, this amazing spirit from Saint Martin, one of the most amazing designers in America, without a doubt. I think she just was on a New York Times article about her design work. Um, she is this figure that comes into the restaurant one day in our original location, sees the space, and says, "You know what? We are going to transform this place to make it feel like you're being transported into Ethiopia directly." And so that was our goal. Whenever we came into this new space and had this completely blank canvas to work from, that used to be a Chinese buffet, sore thumb on the block that didn't really fit so well. So the moment that you walk into this space, Boa, along with Nomita Joshi and Sarah Lee from Spruce Design, Boa, who has her company OI Studio, we came together and drew up this vision of rural Ethiopia, farmlands of Ethiopia, the mountain lands of Ethiopia, all of these impactful topography and geography and smells, textures, feels, to where whenever you step foot or even think about the space itself, emotionally, spiritually, and physically, you are being brought into Ethiopia from every region.
So tell us about the menu, because I know, I love Ethiopian food. I have had Ethiopian food in Chicago, DC, lots of different, and I know there's tons of amazing Ethiopian cuisine out there. And I'm excited for a lot of the young, rising Ethiopian chefs that are doing incredible work in New York, all over. And one of the leading ones is Chef Marcus Samuelson, and I'm sure that's an inspiration for you and many Ethiopian chefs. But Addis Nola is very unique. Tell us a little bit about some of the dishes that you have on the menu.
Our menu was designed and developed to try to touch as many regions in Ethiopia as we can. Obviously, the cornerstones of Ethiopian dining, which was really solidified in the 1800s by a chef who decided to make a book talking about the kind of original Ethiopian foods. One of them being the dorowat, the national dish of Ethiopia, this 24-hour caramelized onion chicken stew. I hope I'm making your mouth water right now.
Yes,
Um,
you are.
that followed by the tibs, which is a quick saute, a really huge staple in the culture with lamb. We've even incorporated shrimp into this recipe because we are in New Orleans, right? So we are talking about that connection. So we're here. We have, sourced great local produce from the purveyors in this city, and shrimp is one of them. Finding a recipe that is inspired by that, as well as some other pieces, the sambusas, and really centering the menu and the cuisine around the family style setting. We want people to really get connected. One of the beautiful things about Ethiopian cuisine and culture is that it really brings people together. You sit at this dinner table, you're eating with your hands, which we've designed a hand washing station in the restaurant. I think one of the only in New Orleans. Our menu is designed in a communal way, in a way that really brings people together through the stews and the sautés and some other fried dishes. This whole snapper, again, another local thing that you can get from the Gulf of Mexico and New Orleans that are really easy to source. That we have on the menu as well. So we are very traditional, rooted in traditional Ethiopian cuisine, while also, again, paying homage and highlighting produce from purveyors in New Orleans who are local in New Orleans as well.
So, and I know recently you went to Ethiopia for the first time, if I'm not mistaken. How was that? How was that experience? And what did you bring back? And, just and ideas and visions that you have for Addis Nola after your trip to Ethiopia?
Whew. Ethiopia, how our people say it. My goodness, this is one thing that I took away whenever I went. It was the my third to last day there. I was there for 10 days. As soon as I got there, first I'll say I didn't have any luggage. So I was there for 5 days with no clothes, having to find a way to source clothes. There's some funny pieces of the story. But before I left, there was a feeling, there was a word, a phrase that really left me, that came over me just in a moment of reflection of the trip. And I said, this is the land of God. Ethiopia is the land of God. Come to find out, about a month later, I'm reading this book by Chase McGee, The Voice of Our Ancestors. He has 3 volumes. He's a young brother in Atlanta who I met at the Invest Festival, which I also met you at, and your son, Sanjan, in Atlanta. One of the first pages, he talks about this land from 5,000 years ago, origins of Kemet and all these places. And they called this place Tanutur. Kemet, if you're familiar, is within that area of Eastern Africa. Tanutur, come to find out, in 5000 BC, Tanutur translates to the land of God. 7,000 years ago. Before I even read this book, 7,000 years ago, they called this place the land of God. And on my 3 days before leaving, just in reflection, in meditation, it came over my body, and I couldn't stop rejoicing and telling people this is the land of God. Why? They have Mount Entoto, which overlooks this supremely populated city full of so many things. You have the Sherafas, these centers of community and coffee, where they'll do Ethiopian original coffee roasting ceremonies where coffee was found. And you get a chance to enjoy coffee with some of the world's premier artists, one of them being Malaku Abe, recognized as one of the best dancers on the face of the earth at Fendika, or Totot, which means really fast. They have some of the fastest service I've ever seen in my life. If they were in New Orleans, we would be seriously out of business. 400 seats in this restaurant. And I mean, their service was impeccable. It was flawless. And it's a shame that these restaurants and some of these establishments that exist in the continent aren't given the utmost respect that they're given, because I promise you there's places in Europe that could not hold a candle up next to some of these places. And you have just the people, right? Like New Orleans, in the same way, when you come to the city, you feel the love of the people instantaneously. You feel like you're a part of it. In Ethiopia, it feels that same way if you understand the country. You have to know these people are this country, our people are uncolonized. There is no European influence in Ethiopia. They've fought against it, being the only country to fight against it. So you have to understand and think from their perspective. English is not the most popular or favored language to be spoken. Do your best to learn the language, to try to speak, even if you make attempts and fail miserably. It will be received with so much love and honor if you do that in Ethiopia. We're going to hopefully within the restaurant, our goal is every January for Christmas to bring a group of people with us. And then take a break at the restaurant. That's it, right? Definitely stay tuned for that. I'm in the works, and obviously getting inspiration from Zella and her daughter, who are also doing this work around the world as well.
Thank you.
You
Your mom, is, in New Orleans and Ethiopia and just, African, East African, Caribbean, Southern culture, Black culinary matriarchs are integral to our community. And, when I see your mom, at Magnolia Yoga Studio, which is this community place, center for wellness, for healing, for, intentionality, ran by our mutual friend Ajax, has really, whenever I see her in there doing hot yoga and just being intentional about her mental health, it is so refreshing, and because a lot of times culinary matriarchs, they have health issues because they're trying to keep the family together or keep the business going. But to see her in there, being intentional about her mental health and her wellness is so profound to me. Your mom is amazing. I just have to say that.
Oh my goodness, she is, and thank you so much. I received that and hope to source some, like 10%, a percentage of some of that amazingness from my mother. Man, she knows how to take care of herself. I think she understands how important it is what we do and the work that we're doing, and she takes on so much on her own. One of the hardest working people I've ever seen or even heard of in my entire life. So for you to hear that from you again is just like, we need her around for a very, 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 very long time. Because there's so many things that I think still need to be done. The trips to Ethiopia being one of them, which I hope, down the line, it will be a part of one of our really big goals as far as continuing to connect our people across the world. But yeah, no, she's amazing. She's a superstar, without a doubt. I'm not gonna wait for nobody else to say that. Dr. Brooke, Mama Brooke, is a superstar, and no shortage of powers, no shortage of grace, no shortage of elegance, and just a light on this earth. So,
and your dad, back in the kitchen, whipping those pots and keeping it all together. And, your staff, the people that you all have attracted, turning tables, Nola, you have two servers that are from Tanzania and, an Ethiopian, adopted,
right.
Who wants to reclaim his heritage, and so I think it just shows the love and the healing space that you all have created. And, when I'm there, I'm invited to, somebody's birthday party or whatever. It's so warm and fuzzy when you walk in, and it's like this light aura that's around the restaurant. So I just want, encourage you all to keep going. And, you all are doing profound work in the city. And if any of our listeners are in New Orleans, definitely, check out Adis Nola. It's definitely, a very, very, very unique family-owned business that has a lot of love in it. But I want to end on, just one last question before we end our podcast, this episode. You were on the food section for the New York Times recently about Black chefs in New Orleans. Historically, there has always been challenges of Black chefs being promoted, being recognized, being paid, equally in this city. And so, how did it feel to be recognized with all of the amazing chefs that were on that photo, that was featured in the New York Times? How did that feel?
It was a moment in history, and as well as yourself being included in that, I knew it was the right place to be. Right, it was a moment in history, something that needs to be reserved, that needs to be preserved, collected, shared, and spread throughout our family legacy. If our great great grandbabies need to have that in their hands, and I'm sure they'll have access to it through other ways that we probably won't be able to imagine. But um, that was a moment in history, a pivotal moment, a turning moment, one that has been in the works for so many years in New Orleans, but one that really shows and exemplifies the change, the turning point, the precipice, should I even say, of when things change and for ownership of culture, ownership of history, reclamation of history, and community in New Orleans, seeing these, veterans, seeing these well decorated and exquisitely talented chefs, historians, storytellers, community leaders be together on one of the largest platforms in America for one of the most important stories that exists right now. Excuse me. One of the most important stories that exists right now. It is an image that will live for the rest of history. And I was just honored to be a part of it, to be considered to be a part of it, to understand what it means to say that in 1960, our people weren't allowed on roads, they weren't allowed on streets, in buildings, to drink from certain water fountains, to go to certain restrooms, not further than 80, 70 years ago. You know what I mean?
Mm,
50, 60 years ago.
right.
That our people weren't allowed to even look in certain directions without being abused, without being beaten, without being
Mm,
hung. My
mm,
God, my
yeah.
God. For us to be there at that moment in Congo Square in Armstrong Park, and to
Mm.
be the folks to represent our community, our ancestors, and those who come after us, it was a moment in history.
Ashe. Well, we want to thank you all for listening to Culture and Flavor. Thank you, Prince. Thank you so much for this beautiful episode. I want you to say it one more time. Can you please tell you to your Tatis Nola?
I got you. Um, yeah, I'm honored to be here. It was a beautiful conversation. I hope this gets to our great great grandbabies as well, and to as many people in the states who are
Indeed.
looking for, other people who are doing similar work as them, who are looking for people who look like them, who want to feel that inspiration and
Mhm.
motivation to make a change in their own communities, in their own households, within themselves. I really want this to lead as an example, that anything on this physical realm is possible. Your
Mm.
spirit has to believe it, your mind has to believe it, and physical is the last level. It comes into existence, it comes into fruition whenever your beating heart, your mind believes it. Any,
And can I?
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say to our listeners. And how old are you, Prince?
I'm 25.
Look at that. Look at that. 25 years old. And it's just the beginning for him. So, much love and much blessings to Adis Nola, to your family, your legacy that you're building. We're so excited to see the future of food that you and your family are going to create in this city, and may it triple fold, and maybe an Angolan restaurant will be in the future. You know what I mean? So you can tell your dad's side,
That's right.
So we're excited. We're excited. So thank you.
Woo!
Let's go. Thank you all for joining Culture and Flavor with Zella Palmer. It's a pleasure. And we will see you on our next episode. Culture and Flavor is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org.
Hey there, I'm Lee Ullman here with some big news from the National Young Farmers Coalition. We're partnering with Heritage Radio Network on a special season of The Farm Report. It's all about what's happening with the Farm Bill and how it impacts farmers and eaters.
I am growing diversified vegetables on land that's been in our family for 150 years.
And so with the pandemic, gentrification, property values going up, we had to sell the land and we lost it.
Join us as we uncover the untold stories behind this massive piece of legislation that shapes how we grow our food, what we eat, and so much more.
The problems we have had, those are things that come from earlier Farm Bill and USDA policy, right? Like Earl Butts, get big or get out.
It's my responsibility to know not only what I'm eating, but then like how that all came to be. And realize like, wow, like this piece of legislation, all this money, like it's technically something that I support as a taxpayer.
While Congress debates the next Farm Bill, this is not just an invitation to listen. It's a call to action. Be part of the conversation. Subscribe to the Farm Report on Heritage Radio Network, wherever you listen to podcasts.